Thank you, Javier. You have no idea how much this means to us. You don't have to thank me, Javier replied. Just take care of Sofia. She's been through more than any child should have to endure. Give her the life she deserves. I will, Alejandro promised. As he hung up, he turned to Sofia, who watched him intently. Was that about the bad people? She asked hesitantly. Alejandro nodded, smiling gently. Yes, Sofia. The people who wanted to hurt you, they've been caught. They'll be punished for what they did. You don't have to worry about them anymore. Sofia exhaled shakily, her eyes filling with relief. So, it's really over? It's really over, Alejandro confirmed, reaching for her hand. You're safe now, Sofia. And we can finally focus on the future. For the first time in days, Sofia's smile returned in full. She squeezed Alejandro's hand and nodded. Okay, Papa. I'm ready. With the past behind them, Alejandro and Sofia embraced their new life together. Alejandro showered his daughter with the love and attention she had been deprived of for so long. Under his care, Sofia flourished. They explored new interests, visited museums and parks, and turned their home into a gallery for her growing collection of paintings. Their bond deepened, and for the first time, Sofia knew she was truly loved and belonged somewhere, right by Alejandro's side. One evening, as they sat in the garden watching the sunset, Sofia turned to Alejandro with a thoughtful expression. Papa, do you think Mama would be happy to see us together? A lump formed in Alejandro's throat at the mention of Lucia, but he smiled and nodded. Yes, Sofia. She would be very happy. She loved you so much, and I know she would be proud of the person you're becoming. Sofia rested her head against his shoulder, sighing contentedly. I miss her, but I'm glad I have you, Papa. I feel like I'm finally home. Alejandro wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. You're home, Sofia. And no matter what happens, you will always have a place here with me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in warm hues, Alejandro felt a deep sense of peace. The journey that had led them here had been long and difficult, but every moment had been worth it. Together, they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. And now, whatever the future held, they would face it side by side, knowing that home wasn't just a place, it was the love they shared. Good afternoon, Sofia. I brought some supplies, food, clothes, and a little something extra for the kids. I hope it helps. Sofia's eyes softened as she looked at him, understanding the depth of his generosity. Thank you, Alejandro. Your kindness means more to these children than you can imagine. Come, let's get everything sorted. Together, they unloaded the car, carrying the boxes of provisions into the kitchen, where volunteers were busy preparing lunch. The smell of warm food filled the air as the staff moved with practiced efficiency, ensuring no child went without. Once the supplies were stored, Alejandro took his customary walk through the orphanage, greeting the children and offering words of encouragement. Their faces, bright with innocence and hope, were a balm to his weary soul. But as he wandered the halls, something caught his eye, a small figure sitting alone in the corner of the playroom, away from the others. She was a little girl, no older than 8, with chestnut hair falling in soft waves around her face. Her eyes, dark and haunting, were filled with a sadness far beyond her years. Alejandro felt an inexplicable pull toward her, as if something deep within him recognized this child. His heart ached. He approached her slowly, kneeling to meet her gaze. Hello there, he said gently, his voice softer than usual. Why are you sitting here all by yourself? The girl looked up at him with a mixture of caution and curiosity. I don't like playing with the others, she replied quietly. They make fun of me. I prefer to be alone. Alejandro's heart twisted at her words. He knew all too well the pain of feeling isolated, of being misunderstood. That must be very hard, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. But you don't have to be alone. I'm here now, and I'd love to get to know you better. The girl seemed surprised by his kindness, her eyes widening as she studied his face. Really? You want to be my friend? Alejandro smiled, feeling warmth spread through him. Of course. My name is Alejandro, and I visit this place often. What's your name? There was a brief hesitation, almost as if she wasn't sure she could trust him. "Sophia," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The name hit Alejandro like a lightning bolt, stirring memories he'd buried deep within. He struggled to maintain his composure as he extended his hand to her. "It's very nice to meet you, Sophia." The girl stared at his outstretched hand, then slowly placed her small hand in his. A tentative smile tugged at her lips, and Alejandro felt a surge of emotion. There was something about her, something that tugged at the deepest parts of his soul. As they talked, Alejandro noticed the uncanny resemblance she bore to Lucia, his late wife. It wasn't just her name. It was her eyes, her smile, the way she carried herself. A sudden, almost irrational thought crossed his mind. Could it be possible? Could this child somehow be connected to the family he thought he'd lost forever? The idea, both terrifying and exhilarating, took root in his mind. But Alejandro knew he couldn't jump to conclusions. He needed to know more. For the rest of the afternoon, Alejandro stayed by Sophia's side, helping her feel comfortable and valued. When lunchtime came, he made sure she was served first, noticing how she picked at her food with little interest. He sat beside her, trying to draw her into conversation, and little by little, she began to open up. By the time he left the orphanage, Alejandro was consumed by thoughts of Sophia. The drive back to his mansion felt like an eternity. His mind raced with questions, none of which he had answers to. As soon as he arrived home, he headed straight to his study, where a framed photograph of Lucia awaited him. He took the photo in his hands, staring at Lucia's smiling face, the same face he had seen reflected in Sophia. Could it really be? Could Sophia somehow be his daughter? The daughter he had believed lost forever? Alejandro sank into his chair, his thoughts a whirlwind of hope and fear. He knew he had to investigate further, to dig into Sophia's past and see if there was any chance, however slim, that she could be his lost child. But as much as he wanted to believe it, he was also terrified. What if he was wrong? What if this was just a cruel twist of fate, setting him up for yet another heartbreak? The night stretched on as Alejandro delved into records, articles, and reports, searching for any clue that could confirm or deny his suspicions. It was a long shot, but he was determined to follow every lead, no matter how small. By the time dawn broke, Alejandro had found something, a police report that matched the details of the accident that had shattered his life. A report that mentioned a little girl, barely 2 years old, who had been found alive amidst the wreckage. His heart pounded in his chest as he read the words over and over again, scarcely able to believe what he was seeing. Could it be true? Could Sophia be his daughter? There was only one way to find out. Alejandro grabbed his car keys and raced back to the orphanage, his mind a blur of anticipation and dread. When he arrived, he demanded to speak with the director, explaining in a rush what he had discovered. She listened in stunned silence, her face pale as she processed the information. "Are you certain, Alejandro?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Do you truly believe Sophia could be your daughter?" Alejandro nodded, his eyes filled with desperate hope. "I have to know the truth. Please let me speak to her." Sophia was brought to him, her eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of fear. Alejandro knelt before her, taking her small hands in his voice trembling as he spoke. "Sophia, I know this might sound strange, but do you remember anything about your parents? About how you came to be here?" Sophia frowned, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I only know that they died in a car accident when I was very little. I don't remember much else." Alejandro's heart broke at her words, but he forced himself to continue. "Sophia, I think you might be my daughter. The daughter I lost in a car accident many years ago. I know it's hard to believe, but I have to find out. Can you help me?" The little girl stared at him, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. "You mean you're my dad?" Alejandro nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "Yes, Sophia. I believe I am. I've been searching for you for so long, and now that I've found you, I can't let you go." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, without warning, Sophia threw herself into Alejandro's arms, her small body shaking with sobs. Alejandro held her close, his own tears falling freely as he realized that, after all these years, he might have finally found his daughter. An overwhelming sense of responsibility weighed on Alejandro as Sophia's sobs began to subside. Gently, he lifted her chin to meet her gaze. "Everything will be all right, Sophia," he whispered, wiping away her tears. "I promise, I'll never let anything bad happen to you again." Sophia, still with tears in her eyes, searched his face for reassurance. "You really think I'm your daughter?" Her voice trembled. "I do," Alejandro replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we find out for sure." He stood, still holding her hand, and turned toward the director, who had been silently watching the scene unfold with a mix of awe and concern. "Is there any way we can get more information about Sophia's past?" Alejandro asked urgently. "Anything that could confirm what we both suspect." The director, still processing the revelation, nodded slowly. "I'll check our records to see what we have. Maybe there's something, old documents or medical history, that can help. But Alejandro," she added softly, "you must prepare yourself. There's a chance that this might not be what you hope." Alejandro understood her caution, but the certainty in his heart wouldn't be shaken. "I know," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "But I have to know one way or the other." As the director left to gather the documents, Alejandro focused back on Sophia. "How about we take a walk outside while we wait?" he suggested gently, trying to ease the tension. Sophia nodded, and together they stepped out into the orphanage's modest garden. The rain had stopped, leaving the world feeling fresh and glistening. The small, somewhat untidy garden was a place where the children could momentarily forget their troubles. As they walked, Alejandro kept a firm but gentle hold on Sophia's hand. His heart ached for her, thinking of everything she'd been through. "Sophia," he began softly, "I want you to know, no matter what happens, you won't be alone anymore. I'll be here for you, whether or not we find the answers we're looking for." Sophia looked up at him, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "But what if I'm not your daughter? What if this is all just a mistake?" The thought squeezed Alejandro's heart, but he forced himself to smile. "Even if that's the case, you've already become very important to me. I'll still be here. I'll still take care of you. We can figure out what that means, together." They continued walking in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. For Sophia, the idea of having a father, someone who cared about her and wanted to protect her, felt almost too much to hope for. She had spent so long believing that she was alone, that her parents were gone forever. The possibility of having a family again was both thrilling and terrifying. For Alejandro, the walk offered a moment to process the enormity of what was happening. After years of mourning the loss of his wife and daughter, he had spent all this time believing his life would never be whole again. But now, in a matter of hours, everything had changed. If Sophia was truly his daughter, then fate had given him a second chance, a chance he was determined not to waste. When they returned to the orphanage, the director was waiting with a folder of documents. Alejandro's heart raced as she handed it to him. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder and scanned the papers urgently. There were medical records, a few official documents, and a handwritten note summarizing what little was known about Sophia's past. His breath caught when he read the note. It described how Sophia had been brought to the orphanage after being found at the scene of a car accident, the same accident that had taken his wife. With shaking hands, he looked up at the director. This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "These details, they match the accident that took Lucia. It has to be her." The director's eyes widened, and she placed a comforting hand on Alejandro's shoulder. "Then we need to take the next step," she said gently. "There are ways to confirm this, to prove without a doubt that Sophia is your daughter." Alejandro nodded, his mind racing. "We'll need to do a DNA test," he said. "That will give us the proof we need." The director agreed. "I'll make the arrangements. It may take a few days, but we can expedite the process." "Thank you," Alejandro murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Turning to Sophia, he knelt down and took her hands in his. We're going to do a test to make sure, he said gently. It won't hurt, and it will help us know for certain if we're really family. Sophia nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of emotions. Okay, she whispered. I want to know, too. The arrangements were made quickly. Within hours, a nurse arrived at the orphanage to take samples from both Alejandro and Sophia. The process was quick and painless, but the significance of it hung heavily in the air. As the nurse left, promising to return with the results as soon as possible, Alejandro and Sophia were left to wait. The next few days felt like the longest of Alejandro's life. He tried to stay busy, throwing himself into work and spending as much time as possible with Sophia. They talked, played games, and explored the garden. Yet, despite his best efforts, he couldn't shake the thoughts of the DNA test from his mind. Every waking moment was consumed by the possibility that Sophia could be his daughter. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. The director called to inform Alejandro that the results had come in and that he needed to come to the orphanage immediately. His heart pounded as he drove, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. When he arrived, he found Sophia waiting in the director's office, her small hands clasped nervously in her lap. The director stood behind her desk, holding a sealed envelope. These are the results, she said quietly, handing the envelope to Alejandro. With trembling hands, Alejandro took the envelope. For a moment, he simply stared at it, his mind racing with possibilities. Then, taking a deep breath, he tore it open and pulled out the sheet of paper. His eyes scanned the document, and as he reached the final line, his knees went weak. He had to steady himself against the desk. Sophia, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It's true. You're my daughter. Tears filled Sophia's eyes as she looked up at him, her lip trembling. Really? It's really true. Alejandro nodded, unable to speak as tears filled his own eyes. He knelt down, opening his arms. Without hesitation, Sophia ran into them, her small body shaking with sobs. Alejandro held her close, his own tears falling freely. After all these years, after all the pain and loss, he had found her. And he would never, ever let her go again. She often gazed into the distance, as if lost in thought. Polite and well-behaved, she carried herself with grace, yet there was a hesitance in her actions, a sense that she was still trying to find her place in this new world. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Alejandro decided to voice his concerns. They had just finished a bedtime story, and Sophia was curled up beside him on the couch, her head resting against his shoulder. Sophia, he began gently, I've noticed you seem a little quiet at times. Is there something on your mind? Anything you'd like to talk about? Sophia looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with uncertainty. She hesitated before softly admitting, I'm just not used to all of this. It's so different from the orphanage. Everything here is so nice, and I'm not sure if I belong. Alejandro's heart ached at her words. He pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Of course you belong, Sophia, he said firmly. This is your home now. You're part of this family. It's okay to feel unsure. It's a big change. But you don't need to worry about fitting in. You're perfect just as you are. She nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in her expression. But what if I mess up? What if I do something wrong? Alejandro smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. We all make mistakes, Sophia. That's how we learn. You don't have to be perfect. All I ask is that you be yourself. That's more than enough. Sophia considered his words for a moment, then leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. I'll try, she whispered, her voice small but determined. Alejandro's voice was warm with affection. That's all I could ever ask for. And remember, you can always talk to me about anything, okay? We're in this together. For a while, they sat in a comfortable silence, the soft crackling of the fireplace adding warmth to the moment. As Alejandro stroked Sophia's hair, a deep sense of contentment settled over him. He knew challenges lay ahead, but he was certain they could face them together. As the weeks passed, Sophia began to open up more. She started expressing her interests, showing a particular fondness for drawing and painting. Encouraging her creativity, Alejandro set up a small art corner in her room, where she could spend hours lost in her imagination. At first, her drawings were simple, tentative, but soon they grew more intricate, bursting with vibrant colors and detail. One day, Alejandro decided to surprise her with a trip to an art supply store. Watching her eyes light up as she took in the rows of paints, brushes, and sketchbooks filled him with joy. "You can pick anything you like," he told her, smiling at her excitement. Sophia hesitated for a moment, as if still unsure this was real. But then, carefully, she began selecting a few items: a set of watercolor paints, fine brushes, and a thick sketchbook. Alejandro added a few more things to the basket: a wooden easel and a set of oil pastels. When they returned home, Sophia spent the rest of the afternoon setting up her new supplies, eagerly creating her first masterpiece on the easel. Alejandro watched her with pride, amazed by the focus and joy she poured into her work. It was clear that art wasn't just a hobby for Sophia. It was a way for her to express herself and find peace in her new life. That evening at dinner, Alejandro noticed how at ease she seemed. The hesitation that once shadowed her was beginning to fade. She chatted excitedly about her day, describing her artwork in detail, and Alejandro listened with rapt attention, thrilled to see her opening up more each day. Yet, despite the growing bond between them, unanswered questions still lingered, mysteries that refused to stay buried. Alejandro had been careful not to overwhelm Sophia with too many details about her past, but he knew the truth would have to come to light eventually. How had Sophia survived the accident? Why had she been taken to the orphanage instead of being reunited with him? And what role had the mysterious nurse played in all of this? One evening, after Sophia had gone to bed, Alejandro sat in his study, staring at the documents and reports spread out before him. He had been tirelessly searching for answers, following every lead, no matter how small. With the help of his lawyers, he had tracked down police reports, hospital records, and orphanage files, but glaring gaps remained, gaps that troubled him deeply. His thoughts kept drifting back to the nurse mentioned in the reports, the woman present at the accident scene, who had later disappeared without a trace. Something about her involvement didn't sit right. It felt as though there was more to the story than what was on paper. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Alejandro made a decision. He would hire a private investigator, someone with the skills to dig deeper. He needed answers, not just for himself, but for Sophia. She deserved to know the truth. The next day, Alejandro reached out to one of the city's most reputable private investigators, Javier Reyes. Known for his tenacity and discretion, Javier seemed like the perfect person for the job. When he arrived at the mansion, Alejandro laid everything out before him: every document, every suspicion. Javier listened carefully, taking notes, his expression serious. "This is definitely a complicated case," he remarked, flipping through the files. "But I've dealt with worse. I'll start by looking into the nurse's background, see where she went, what she's been up to since the accident. It might take some time, but I'm confident I can uncover something useful." Alejandro nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. "I appreciate it, Javier. Just, please be discreet. I don't want Sophia to know anything until we have solid answers." "Of course," Javier agreed. "I'll keep you updated." As Javier left, Alejandro felt a mixture of hope and unease. The truth could bring them closure, or it could expose painful secrets. Either way, he was determined to protect Sophia. Days passed. Alejandro kept their daily routines intact: breakfast together, trips to the park, art sessions in her room. Yet beneath it all, the tension gnawed at him. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart raced, hoping for news. Finally, nearly a week later, the call came. Javier's voice was calm but serious. "Alejandro, I've found something. The nurse, she was involved in some shady dealings. Connections to a trafficking ring." Alejandro's blood ran cold. "Trafficking? It's still unclear," Javier continued. "But from what I've uncovered, it looks like there was a plan to take Sophia, to place her somewhere she'd be lost. Sold off, essentially. It's possible someone intervened last minute and she ended up at the orphanage instead. I'm still piecing things together, but there's more to this than we thought. A surge of anger and protectiveness rose within Alejandro. The thought of his daughter being placed in such danger was almost too much to bear. Javier, I need everything. Who was behind this? Why it happened? How Sofia ended up at the orphanage? Whatever it takes, I want those responsible brought to justice. I'm on it, Javier assured him. But Alejandro, this could get messy. If you go down this path, you need to be ready for the consequences. Alejandro's voice was unwavering. I don't care about the consequences. All that matters is Sofia. I won't stop until I know the full truth. As he hung up, his mind raced. The revelation of a trafficking ring complicated everything, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't stop until his daughter was truly safe. For now, he'd keep the details from her. She had been through enough. But one day, when the time was right, they would face the truth together. And when that day came, he would be ready. Sofia's laughter had become a familiar and comforting sound in the mansion, a sign of her growing confidence and happiness. Alejandro found solace in her joy, even as he continued to keep the truth from her. One evening, after a day spent painting and baking cookies, Alejandro received a call from Javier that changed everything. Alejandro, I found something, Javier said, his tone urgent. It's about the nurse. She was working for a man named Victor Salazar, a known trafficker who's been on the authorities' radar for years. It looks like Sofia was meant to be handed over to him, but something went wrong, and she ended up at the orphanage instead. I've already passed the information on to the police. They're planning to move on him soon. A chill ran down Alejandro's spine. So, this Victor Salazar's the one responsible for everything? Most likely, Javier replied. We still don't know exactly how Sofia was spared, but someone inside the operation may have had a change of heart. We may never find out for sure. What matters now is making sure Salazar is stopped before he can harm anyone else. Alejandro tightened his grip on the phone. Thank you, Javier. Please keep me updated. I will, Javier promised. And Alejandro, be careful. This isn't over yet. As Alejandro hung up, his mind raced with emotions. Rage burned within him at the thought of a man like Salazar being behind Sofia's abduction. Yet there was also relief that justice might finally be served. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't keep this from Sofia any longer. She had a right to know the truth. They had to face the past together. That evening, after dinner, Alejandro sat with Sofia in the living room. Her bright, happy expression made his heart ache, knowing that what he was about to say might shatter her joy. Sofia, he said gently, taking her hands in his, there's something I need to tell you. It's about your past. Sofia's face grew serious, her wide eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and fear. What is it, Papa? Alejandro took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. I've been trying to find out what happened after the accident, how you ended up at the orphanage, and why we were separated for so long. The truth is there were bad people involved. People who wanted to take you away from me, to hurt you. Sofia's eyes widened in shock. Alejandro squeezed her hands reassuringly. But you were saved, Sofia. Someone made sure you were taken to the orphanage instead of falling into their hands. I've been working with someone to make sure those responsible are brought to justice. Tears welled up in Sofia's eyes. Why would they want to hurt me? What did I do wrong? Alejandro's heart broke at her words. Pulling her into a tight embrace, he whispered, You did nothing wrong, Sofia. None of this was your fault. There are just some terrible people in the world. But I promise you, I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. Sofia clung to him, her small body trembling. I'm scared, Papa, she whispered. What if they come back for me? They won't, Alejandro assured her firmly. I won't let anything happen to you. You're safe here with me. And I'll make sure those people can never hurt anyone again. They sat together in silence, the weight of the past heavy in the air. Alejandro could feel Sofia's tears soaking into his shirt, and he held her close, wanting to shield her from all the pain. Finally, she pulled back slightly, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. Thank you for telling me, Papa, she said softly. I'm glad I know the truth, even if it's scary. You're very brave, Sophia, Alejandro said, stroking her hair. And you're not alone in this. We'll face it together. She nodded, a small but determined smile appearing on her face. Together. In the days that followed, anticipation filled the mansion as they waited for news from Javier. Though still shaken, Sophia seemed to draw strength from Alejandro's presence. They tried to focus on the joys of their new life, but the tension lingered beneath the surface. Then, one morning, as they sat at breakfast, Alejandro's phone rang. It was Javier. Alejandro, it's done, Javier said, his voice steady but filled with finality. The police raided Victor Salazar's operation last night. He's been arrested along with several of his associates. It's over. Relief washed over Alejandro like a wave.